Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our latest Daytimer Speaker Series lecture with Gloria Harris. Gloria earned her doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Washington. She co-authored Assertive Training for Women Surviving Infidelity, Women Trailblazers of California, and Remarkable Women of San Diego. She has served on numerous boards and commissions, including the Women's Museum of California, and she is a member of Beth Israel. We're very excited to have her with us today for this lecture. For those of you that joined us for her previous lecture, this was actually by popular demand. We had covered so many great figures last session, and we asked Gloria to return. So without further ado, I will pass it over to her. And I will also do a screen share. There'll be a PowerPoint with some visuals, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eileen. I want to begin by thanking three people who suggested the women who were included in my talk. First, Don Harrison, editor and publisher of Jewish World San Diego. Lori Barron, director of the Lipinski Institute for Judaic Studies. And Laurel Schwartz, archivist for the Jewish Historical Society of San Diego. I followed a pattern that's parallel to the co-authored book I wrote with Hannah Cohn called Remarkable Women of San Diego. And like that book, I've divided the women I'm going to talk about into different eras. What you see in front of you as the beginning is a little note of humor. It's actually from a book that Eileen Fine wrote. It says, once they find out they can dance, this man is saying to his wife, they also want to lead. Next slide. The late 19th century, called the Victorian era, was an era when there was a sharp differentiation between gender roles. Women were supposed to remain separated from the economic sphere that men occupied outside the home. Home was a woman's proper sphere of influence. San Diego's Jewish pioneers arrived with statehood in 1950 and settled in Old Town, as you know, located below the hill on which the Spanish built the first California mission in 1769. In this town of 800, there were approximately 25 Jews until the 1860s. The woman who's pictured is Victoria Jacobs. She wrote a day-to-day diary that provided a firsthand account of San Diego's Jewish life in the 1850s. She began her diary in June 1856, when she was 17. Since most diaries from early California were written by men and focused on the gold rush, a diary written by a 17-year-old girl in this period is a remarkable treasure. The diary included descriptions of her family's daily routines and religious practices. In several entries, she complained, as some teenagers do, about having to clean her family's home before Sabbath. On October 9th, she wrote, "Today is Yom Kippur. We all fasted well. I passed my time very well all the day, but as soon as I broke my fast, I felt a little sick at the supper table." Her October 14th entry reads, "Today is Sukkot, and we are all busy doing nothing, and there is no synagogue here. The only difference is that we pass our time at home instead of going to a place of worship." You may be aware it was not until 1889 that the city's first synagogue, Beth Israel, was erected. Victoria's diary extended until February 1857, when she became engaged to Maurice Franklin, who was 21 years her senior. On March 31st, she and Maurice were married. As there were no rabbis in San Diego at the time, her father, Mark Jacobs, performed the marriage. Victoria's first child, a son, was born in San Diego in 1857. 2 years later, the couple moved to San Bernardino, where their second son was born. At the termination of her third pregnancy, Victoria died. She was 23 years old at the time of her passing. After his wife's death, Maurice published her journal titled Diary of a San Diego Girl, 1856. It was their younger son, Selim Franklin, who preserved his mother's diary. After graduating with a law degree from UC Berkeley, Selim married Henrietta Herring, member of a wealthy Episcopalian family, and the couple built a large Victorian-style home in Tucson, Arizona, that passed into the hands of their daughter, Gladys Franklin Carroll. Some years ago, Sylvia Arden, who was then head librarian for the Historical Society's collections, borrowed the diary from Gladys Franklin Carroll and made a copy, which she published in 1974. The UCSD library owns a copy of the book, and I read it in preparation for my talk. When Victoria Jacobs was writing about day-to-day events in 1865, she could not have known that someday her diary would become an important and unique document of social history. And some of you may have visited the exhibit between 2017 and 18 at the San Diego History Center in Balboa Park. It was titled History and Heritage of San Diego's Jewish Community, and her diary was in a glass case at the exhibit. Next. Next slide. There we go. Many changes in women's roles took place in the first half of the 20th century. In 1911, California women obtained the right to vote. And in 1920, the 19th Amendment granted equal voting rights to all women, 100 years ago this year. During World War II, women working was seen as a national necessity. But after the war ended, men wanted their role as breadwinners back, and most women left their jobs as a patriotic duty. Although the number of women who worked outside the home rose throughout the decade, few kept their jobs after marriage. During this era, 1900 to 1950, San Diego's Jewish community grew, and several Jewish women made significant contributions. This woman that you're looking at now is Alice Klauber, an artist and art patron who significantly influenced our city's cultural development. She served as chair of the 1915 Panama, California Exposition's Art Committee and co-founded the San Diego Museum of Art. Alice was the third of 12 children born to Abraham and Teresa Klauber. Her father was a prominent merchant, and she was raised in a family that valued art, music, and literature. In 1885, the family moved to San Francisco, where Alice began her art education. In the early 1900s, she visited Europe and studied with many renowned artists. Alice returned to San Diego in 1892. In 1915, the Panama Canal had just opened, and San Diego organized the Panama California Exposition. The board of directors was reluctant to allow women representation in exposition management, but Alice had other ideas. She was quoted in the San Diego Union. "The women of San Diego feel they should be represented at the exposition. There has been no provision made for restrooms for women at the exposition grounds." Alice formed the San Diego County Women's Association and notified the board that if provision were not made for women, the association would advertise the fact in every women's club in the US. Not surprisingly, the board decided to appoint her chair of the exposition's art committee. Alice's work was exhibited frequently in Southern California, occasionally winning awards. With her brother-in-law, Julius Wagenheim, she founded the Fine Arts Society, predecessor to the San Diego Museum of Art. Next. Next slide. Hello? Where'd you go? There we go.
Is this, yeah, this slide is correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Next. This is Rose Newman. Rose Newman was born in Austria in 1884. After her family moved to Brooklyn, she fell in love with a handsome tinsmith named Al Newman. They were married in 1911 and decided to seek their fortune in San Diego. In 1914, Rose founded our city's first Jewish newspaper, the San Diego Jewish Bulletin. Soon after arriving in San Diego, Rose volunteered for the Jewish Welfare Society, known today as the Jewish Family Service. And 2 years later, she became its president, a position she held for 25 years. In 1914, she directed an employee, Mrs. Sadie Epstein, to put out the first edition of the San Diego Jewish Bulletin. The paper, a mimeograph publication, was distributed at the outbreak of World War I to all San Diego Jews. "When we came to San Diego," she later recounted, "for Jews, it was like a prairie wilderness. That's why Sadie Epstein and I had to have that newspaper to let one Jew know about another, what one did, where another lived, where we could meet, holiday services, who needed help, where to come for counsel, and lots of other things." Rose embraced the whole community. She volunteered at the Braille Institute and made potato latkes for the servicemen at the USO in World War II. In 1952, she helped to establish the Hebrew Home for the Aged, which is now known as Seacrest Village. Rose died in 1981 at the age of 87. In an article published in the San Diego Heritage titled, "Rose Newman, a Legend, is Mourned," her friend Ida Nassatir wrote, "One ought to write a volume about the life of this humble great woman. A mere tribute is wholly inadequate." Rose Newman arrived in San Diego to find a prairie wilderness, which she worked to transform into a connected and vibrant Jewish community. Next slide. Belle Baroncino was a painter and muralist who left an indelible mark on the arts in San Diego. There are still traces of her career in the city. The scenic view of the village mural in the La Jolla post office, and a second mural, The Progress of Man, in the Balboa Park Club. Born to Romanian immigrant parents in Chicago in 1902, Belle studied at the Minneapolis School of Fine Arts under Anthony Angarola, and they fell in love. Unfortunately, her father was determined to keep his daughter and her Gentile suitor apart. and he sent her to California to live with an uncle. After Angarola was involved in a serious automobile accident, Belle arranged to meet him in Chicago. She was waiting for him to join her in a civil marriage ceremony when she was told he had been found dead in his hotel room, apparently the victim of a brain aneurysm related to the accident. After the death of her fiancé, Belle remained in Chicago and supported herself by teaching. In the winter of 1932, during the Great Depression, she decided that it was easier to be poor in sunny Southern California than in the Windy City, and she moved to Los Angeles. The following year, she relocated to San Diego. Belle's passion was to paint murals. In the 1930s, the federal government supported public art through the Work Progress Administration, more commonly known as the WPA. And she was commissioned to paint a mural for the California Pacific International Exposition in Balboa Park. The finished work, called The Progress of Man, remains today on the walls of the Balboa Park Club. Sadly, another of her murals, The Seven Arts, made for the auditorium at La Jolla High, was destroyed in 1975. The building wasn't up to code for earthquakes, and because the work was painted as a fresco directly on the wall, it was deemed too expensive to preserve. When the mural came down, Belle was devastated. In 1980, she moved to Wesley Palms, a retirement home in Pacific Beach. While living there, a nurse entered her room to find her painting a male resident who was posing in the nude. As a result, she was asked to move to another facility, and she chose White Sands in La Jolla, where she died in 1988. Next slide. In 1963, Joseph Astor, director of the Jewish Community Center on 54th Street, hired Molly Harris as its first librarian. During her tenure, the library's collection increased from 538 books to almost 20,000 volumes. Molly held regular book reviews, engaged notable literary speakers, and initiated the first annual Jewish Book Fair. She served as the JCC's first and only professional librarian for 33 years. Born in 1910, Molly received her library degree from Brooklyn College and entered the Brooklyn Public Library training class in 1929. After completing the course, she was appointed to the staff and remained at the library for 12 years. In 1941, she married Dan Harris, and the devoted couple remained together for more than 50 years. In the early 60s, the Jewish Community Center's library consisted of a few hundred books. Believing that there was an important need for a Judaica library in San Diego, Molly immediately went to work organizing the center's library. She began by going out into the community and talking to various groups about the benefits of reading. Under her leadership, the library's collection increased significantly. In 1970, the JCC built a larger facility. Molly submitted an application for funding to the United Jewish Federation and wrote, "Our library has the task of shaping a generation to be committed to Jewish books and the ideals that Jewish books represent: the continuity of Jewish life, the unity of the Jewish people through identification with Jewish causes, with Israel, and with Jewish culture." The library served as the center of Jewish literary life until 1996, when it was moved to the Lawrence family JCC in University City. In the same year, Molly retired. She died in 2004 at the age of 94. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. This is Deborah Zaki. Some of you may have recognized her or even know her. Organic food may be a fad of the 21st century, but Deborah Zaki began organic farming in 1940. She and her husband founded the world's first fitness resort and spa in Tecate, Mexico. And nearly 2 decades later, Deborah opened the Golden Door in Escondido, which grew into a destination spa for Hollywood celebrities. Equal part entrepreneur and activist, she even ran for Congress in 1982. Deborah was born in Brooklyn to immigrant parents. Her mother was active in the New York Vegetarian Society, and the family ate mostly raw fruits, vegetables, and nuts. Frustrated by the lack of fresh produce in the city, one day Deborah's mother announced they were moving to Tahiti. In Tahiti, the family met Edmund Zaki, a Romanian Jew who was researching the health-giving aspects of living in the South Pacific. After returning to the United States in 1934, Deborah worked at a health camp in California run by Zaki, and they were married. At the time, she was 17 and he was 36. In 1940, her husband's Romanian passport expired and he faced deportation. The couple moved to Tecate, Mexico, where he could wait out the war without a passport. Soon after arriving, they founded a health and exercise camp. The site eventually matured into today's luxurious Rancho La Puerto. In the late 1960s, she and Edmund divorced, and Deborah took over the spa's operations. But Deborah's passion and entrepreneurship went beyond healthful eating and fitness. In 2001, she founded the New Americans Museum located at Liberty Station to document and recognize the diversity of immigrants and their contributions. This past May, Deborah turned 98. Following days of flower deliveries and congratulatory phone calls, her celebration concluded with a Rancho La Puerto Zoom gathering. When asked how she was spending the past month in her Mission Hills home, she stated that she had been busy planning her 100th birthday celebration to be held at Rancho La Puerta. She realized it was only 2 years away and decided she had better get started. Next slide. At the beginning of this era, 1950 to 2000, women continued to be viewed as the weaker sex. In the 1950s and 60s, television programs like Leave It to Beaver, where Dad Ward Cleaver always gets home in time for dinner, and Mom June Cleaver cleans the house wearing a dress and pearls, identified women's role. By 1963, Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, ushered in the women's liberation movement, and conventional assumptions about the role of women began to change. A few trailblazing Jewish women even became rabbis. This is Gloria Penner. Many of you may recognize her. Pioneering radio and television journalist, Gloria Penner is remarkable for her 43 years in public broadcasting. At KPBS, she was involved in the content of all the programs she hosted or appeared on, including San Diego Week, These Days, Editors Roundtable, and Gloria Penner in Conversation. Born as Elaine Gloria Stern, She was the first in her family to attend college, urged on by her mother and large extended family of Russian Jewish immigrants. Gloria earned her bachelor's degree from Brooklyn College, which later recognized her with a Lifetime Achievement Award. She began her professional life as a high school English teacher in Brooklyn and was a proud member of the San Diego Brooklyn Club. Gloria joined KPBS in 1969 as Director of Community Relations. She was a fighter from day one, explained the station's general manager. She was one of the first women to break into management at KPBS when the good old boys were running the station. She was the first woman to get a senior management position. She fought hard, not just for stories on politics, but for stories that focused on women and women's rights. Gloria earned numerous awards, including 7 Emmys, 5 Golden Mikes, and 2 Gracies from the American Federation of Women in Radio and Television. She also served as president of the San Diego Press Club, which gave her its Harold Keene Award for Excellence in Journalism. Once she went on camera in 1970, she did not stop broadcasting news and public affairs until illness forced her hand. Gloria Petter died in 2012 at the age of 81. Next slide. Irene Fine, a pioneering educator, founded the Women's Institute for Continuing Jewish Education. Publications of the Institute have served. Let me get rid of the dog. 1 second. Yeah. I'm back. Irene Fine, a pioneering educator, founded the Women's Institute for Continuing Jewish Education. Publications of the Institute have served as a resource for Jewish women nationwide. The San Diego Women's Haggadah was the first women's text available for those seeking a feminist Seder. And another book, Taking the Fruit, Modern Women's Tales of the Bible, was the first collection of women's midrashim. Irene was born in Minnesota. After 2 years at the University of Minnesota, she moved to San Francisco, where she met her future husband, Lawrence Fine. The couple later moved to San Diego, and in 1973, she earned a bachelor's degree at SDSU. 4 years later, Irene decided to pursue graduate studies at the Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles and enrolled in an interdisciplinary program that combined Jewish studies, women's studies, and adult education. Faced with a mandatory internship for her PhD and no institution in San Diego where she could teach courses on Jewish women, she created the Women's Institute for Continuing Jewish Education. In her book, Educating the New Jewish Woman, Irene wrote, "The Jewish history found in textbooks, the history most of us grew up with, is one in which women are either not mentioned as active participants or else are characterized in negative terms. A history that does not reflect back women's roles, courage, and versatility is one that does not encourage women to grow and mature." The Institute continued until 2004 and made it possible for women seeking gender equality to explore their relationship to the Jewish tradition in an innovative and exciting way. After her retirement, Irene donated her personal papers, photographs, and other documents to the Jewish Historical Society of San Diego. And she and her husband, who's an ophthalmologist, still live in La Mesa. When Lenore Bohm was 15 years old, she visited Israel, where she met Golda Meir and David Ben-Gurion, and decided to become a rabbi. At the time, women were not permitted to be ordained as rabbis. Lenore was born in New York in 1954 to refugee parents who fled Vienna in 1938. After graduating from high school, she reluctantly decided to share her career plans with her rabbi. His response was, "You don't want to be a rabbi. You want to be a rabbi's wife and president of the sisterhood." Lenore graduated from Carnegie Mellon University and applied to the Hebrew Union College to begin rabbinic studies, but her application was put on hold. She next applied and was accepted by the Interfaith Seminary in Washington, D.C., where she spent a year, and finally was accepted at the Hebrew Union College. In 1982, Lenore was one of the first 50 women ordained into the rabbinate. Her first job was as assistant rabbi at Congregation Beth Israel, making her the first female rabbi in San Diego County. After 3 years, she left to become the senior rabbi at the newly formed Temple Solel in Encinitas. At the time, Lenore was one of only 15 female senior or solo congregational rabbis in the United States. Rabbi Bohm was married to Dr. Paul Goodman, and when she began at Temple Solel, the couple already had 2 sons. In 1992, she left the temple, later gave birth to another son, and adopted a 3-year-old daughter from a Siberian orphanage. Although raising a family, Lenore enrolled in a graduate program in feminist theology at the Claremont Graduate University in Pomona. After completing the program, she was offered a 6-month position at a synagogue in Adelaide, Australia. The entire family moved to Australia, and the 6 months became 2 years. Lenore served as the first female rabbi at Adelaide. Several years ago, my husband and I planned a trip to Adelaide, and Lenore arranged for us to visit her former congregation. When we arrived, the current rabbi warmly greeted us, and we attended a memorable Shabbat service at Temple Bet Shalom. In subsequent years, Lenore has directed the Jewish Healing Center and Waters of Eden, and served as director of adult Jewish education at the Lawrence Family JCC. She is a remarkable woman who broke the barriers for other female rabbis in San Diego and continues to be a respected and popular teacher and leader. Next. Susan Golding, San Diego's first Jewish mayor, served for 2 terms. Her major accomplishments include initiating the largest downtown redevelopment project, helping to establish the first winter shelter for the homeless, and bringing the 1996 Republican National Convention to our city. Susan grew up in Indianapolis and earned her bachelor's degree from Carleton College and a master's from Columbia University. Her father, Brage Golding, was a former president of San Diego State University. Susan's first marriage ended in divorce in 1979. 5 years later, she married Richard Silberman in a ceremony performed by Rabbi Sternfield at Temple Beth Israel. The couple were divorced in 1991. Prior to her election as mayor in 1992, Susan served on the San Diego City Council and the County Board of Supervisors. In 1995, Susan helped negotiate a deal to expand Jack Murphy Stadium, later renamed Qualcomm Stadium, in order to keep the San Diego Chargers in town and attract a second Super Bowl to the city. In exchange, the Chargers promised to stay in San Diego through 2020. Unfortunately, the deal also contained an agreement to buy any tickets the Chargers didn't sell, starting in the 1997 season. Once considered a rising political star, Susan's reputation was clouded by continued controversy over the Chargers' ticket guarantee that cost the city millions for unsold tickets. Even her most ardent supporters conceded that the issue overshadowed her numerous achievements. After leaving her political career behind, Susan Golding has been involved in several nonprofit organizations, including San Diego's Child Abuse Prevention Foundation. 2 years ago, in 2018, her memoriam for Senator John McCain was published in the Union Tribune. Susan served with him on the board of directors of the International Republican Institute. It is an honor to have been his colleague and friend, she wrote. Next. Lynn Shank was the first congresswoman to be elected from California south of Los Angeles and served in the House of Representatives from 1993 to 1995. After leaving Congress, she worked as the first female chief of staff to Governor Greg Davis from 1998 to 2003. The daughter of Hungarian immigrants, Lynn was born in the Bronx. Her father was a Holocaust survivor, and her mother arrived on one of the last ships to the US. She earned her bachelor's degree from UCLA and a law degree from the University of San Diego. When Lynn began law school in the late 60s, there were only 3 women in her class. She recalled that her property class professor asked her, "Why are you in this law school taking the place of a man who has to earn a living and support a family?" After earning her JD, she did postgraduate study in international law at the London School of Economics. In 1971, with 2 other female lawyers, Lynn challenged the Grand Creel's refusal to permit female lunch guests between noon and 3 o'clock. The women devised a plan and asked the male friend to make a reservation under his name. At the scheduled time, they marched unescorted into the restaurant, but were refused service. The 3 continued to return until a gentleman only until 3 p.m. sign was permanently removed. In the 70s, married women were unable to obtain credit in their own name. I know that personally because I got my PhD in 1972 and I was finally Dr. Harris. So I went to the Seattle Trust Bank and I said, "I'd like a credit card." They said, "Are you married?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, we won't give you a credit card. You have a husband." And so the same thing happened to Lynn Shank in 1971. So she did something smarter than me. She co-founded the Women's Bank of San Diego. Facing opposition in her desire to become a member of the Bar Association, she and other women established the Lawyers Club of San Diego, whose purpose was to advance the status of women in the legal profession. Lynn Shank currently practices corporate law and serves on the boards of a number of organizations. Next. By the dawn of the 21st century, cultural assumptions about women's role had significantly changed. Although a woman did not yet serve as president of the United States, many were able to become university presidents, legislative leaders, and even police chiefs. The remarkable Jewish women profiled in this era, 2000 to 2020, exemplify strong role models who shared a more expansive vision of what a woman could accomplish. I'm sure you recognize Susan Golding. Susan has been the U.S. representative for California's 53rd Congressional District since 2001. Prior to Congress, she spent 8 years on the San Diego School Board and served in the California State Assembly for 3 terms. Susan was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts. All of her grandparents were Jewish immigrants from Russia. After graduating from the University of California, Berkeley, she lived on a kibbutz in Israel and later earned a master's degree in social work from the University of North Carolina. She married Steve Davis, and the couple had 2 sons. In 1972, the family moved to San Diego, where Susan worked as a social worker and joined the League of Women Voters. She became involved in such issues as housing and education and was elected president of the League in 1977. Before long, with encouragement from other League members, she campaigned for a position on the school board and won. Susan was elected to the State Assembly in 1995, and in 2000, she ran against Brian Bilbray, a Republican, for the seat in California's 53rd Congressional District and won. Susan recently announced that she will not seek re-election in 2020. My decision represents a desire to live and work at home in San Diego, she wrote in a letter to her constituents. Next. Shelley Zimmerman was promoted to San Diego's chief of police in 2014, the first female chief in the history of the San Diego Police Department. And some of you who are my Zoom presentation may have heard her as I did when she spoke at Temple Beth Israel a number of years ago. Some of her prior assignments include going undercover as a student at Patrick Henry High School, where she cracked an infamous student narcotics ring, and working in Vice, where she posed as a prostitute, and serving as lieutenant, captain, and assistant chief. Shelley grew up in a conservative Jewish home in Beechwood, Ohio, and attributes her work ethic to her family's Jewish values. An interest in sports brought her to California in 1980, when she and some friends went to the Rose Bowl to see Ohio State play USC. They also visited San Diego, and she fell in love with our city. 2 years later, with her degree in criminal justice from Ohio State University, she arrived in San Diego. Her plan was to follow in her trial attorney father's footsteps and go to law school. But she needed money, and the police department was hiring. During her years of service, her superiors urged her to take the exam so she could move through the ranks. My goal was never to be the chief of police, she explained. All I ever cared about was to do the best job I could. By doing that and doing well, it created and opened up opportunities. In 2018, Chief Zimmerman, a 35-year San Diego Police Department veteran, retired from one of the most important positions in our city. When the San Diego Police Department awarded her a Lifetime Achievement Award, The foundation's president, Sarah Napoli, stated, "Chief Zimmerman is an inspiring and incredible role model for young people aspiring to leadership in law enforcement." Last year, Shelley joined the National University faculty. Her responsibilities include presenting lectures on leadership topics and collaborating with faculty and law enforcement officials nationwide. Bonnie DeManis has been a remarkable woman throughout her life. Rising from a tough working class neighborhood south of Boston to become San Diego's first female and first Jewish district attorney. Bonnie put herself through college and then law school while working as a junior clerk typist in the district attorney's office. She graduated from Thomas Jefferson School of Law in 1976 and spent the next 12 years as a deputy district attorney. In 1998, she was elected to serve as judge on the Superior Court, where she pioneered the domestic violence court to reduce recurrences of abuse. And in 2003 was elected district attorney. Working with organizations like the Innocence Project, she implemented programs to help protect against wrongful convictions. As DA for nearly 15 years, Bonnie helped to make San Diego one of the safest big cities in America. Interviewed by the Jewish Journal prior to her retirement as DA in 2017, she was asked about her plans for the future. "In 10 years, maybe I'll make my mother proud and go back to school online to become a rabbi. In many ways, being a judge was like being a rabbi," she explained. According to an article in the Voice of San Diego, the woman who was one of San Diego's most powerful politicians wasn't ready to retire. After a bout with cancer and a double knee replacement, in 2018, she ran for county supervisor, but lost to Nathan Fletcher. Next. In 2013, only a day after the former San Diego Unified School District superintendent retired, the school board unanimously appointed elementary school principal Cindy Martin as his replacement. She had never held a more senior position than principal, and the rapid appointment without search process or community input was described as highly unusual, virtually unheard of by the San Diego Union Tribune. Born in Chicago, Cindy and her family moved to San Diego, where they joined Temple Emmanuel. Cindy earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin and her master's degree from UCSD. Her first 7 years as a teacher were at Congregation Beth Israel's day school. "I realized that I wanted to bring what I knew with the students I worked with at Beth Israel into a setting with students that had more challenges," she explained. Cindy's first job in public education was in the Poway Unified School District. In 2002, she was recruited to join the staff of Central Elementary in City Heights and jumped at the chance. The school serves a community where 99% of families are low income and 85% of students are English learners. At Central Elementary, Cindy nurtured innovative programs, including a successful biliteracy program, quality after school and preschool programs, and a community health and wellness center. Her team's success was validated by improved student achievement. Superintendent of Schools Cindy Martin believes there are no excuses when it comes to providing children with the best conditions that will enable them to become confident, successful learners who can achieve their dreams. As leader of California's second largest school district, Superintendent Cindy Martin was recently appointed by Governor Newsom to the state's Teacher Credentialing Commission. This is her third state appointment in recent years. Thank you for allowing me to share the stories of these 15 remarkable women. And on your screen right now, you see the cover of the book that inspired my idea to discuss the profiles of successful and remarkable Jewish women. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. It was so interesting to learn about all of the fascinating women. I do want to encourage everyone, her books are for sale, whether it's through Amazon or any independent book retailers. Please do support and pick them up. We have just a few moments left here if there's any questions. And there's one that got asked last time that I'll just plant in right away, which is, of all of the amazing women that could have been covered in a book like this, how did you find some of these, or was there one that you kind of found in a unique or different way, a surprising way?
At the very beginning, I pointed out that I contacted Don Harrison, who's the publisher of Jewish World San Diego. I know him personally. He answered me. Laurie Barron, I also know, who's director of the Lipinski Institute, and Laurel Schwartz from the Jewish Historical Society. They made recommendations. However, I've lived in San Diego more than 30 years, so I certainly remembered people like Susan Golding and Rabbi Bohm in 1983 bar mitzvah, our son. So it was a combination of recommendations and personal knowledge.
That's wonderful. Are there any other questions from the crowd here? We can unmute, or you can drop them in the chat. I do see a lot of compliments coming through the chat. A lot of interesting program, excellent presentations, a lot of compliments. Any standout questions, or I know a lot of information was covered. Well, I'm looking around and it looks like so many compliments coming in, not a lot of questions, but actually Gloria and I had discussed that was expected, that really a lot of it is already covered. So most of the questions may have already been answered, but with no other submitted questions, I will stop the recording and we can all say goodbye to one another. Thank you all for coming today.